What's the idea of leaving our newborn baby to my sister every day?
I got a call from my husband while he was at work. I couldn't help but be surprised at the anger in his usually mild-mannered husband's voice. I quickly clarified the situation to clear up the misunderstanding. Huh? Our daughter is sleeping at home.
Huh?
My husband raised his voice in surprise. One question led to another, and we both were left puzzled. I'll ask my sister-in-law for the truth. I decided to contact my sister-in-law, and a shocking truth was revealed. My name is Linda. I've been married for 3 years to my husband, Bob, who is 1 year older. We were recently blessed with our first child. Our daughter's name is Hannah. Hannah is so adorable, but I'm having a tough time as a first-time mom. Since my parents live far away, I didn't have the option of returning home for childbirth. So, since I was discharged from the hospital, I've been a one-woman show during the day. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that I've managed to get by thanks to Bob, who is very attentive to Hannah. Even when he's tired from work, he never complains, whether Hannah is having trouble falling asleep or waking up crying in the middle of the night. I think the fact that Bob is such a mild-mannered person allows me to deal with Hannah with hardly any stress. I was truly grateful for his presence. So, I was taken aback by this sudden call from him, and especially by the anger in his voice.
Linda, I just got a call from Mom. What the heck is going on?
Huh? Your mom? What do you mean?
What's the idea behind leaving your newborn with Marissa every day? Mom has a bad back, and apparently Marissa has been taking care of everything all by herself.
What? I couldn't keep up with the sudden introduction of my sister-in-law and the word newborn. Marissa is my sister-in-law, Bob's sister. She lives about a 15-minute walk away at her parents' house, where she lives with them. She's flexible because she works from home and takes care of her mother. My husband continued his criticism.
How can you just leave a baby who's only 3 weeks old? I'd be too worried to do that. Marissa has never taken care of a baby. I understand that you're exhausted after giving birth, but at least consult with me before you leave her with Marissa.
His anguish cry made me realize that this was no ordinary situation. Hold on, I have no idea what you're talking about. Marissa is taking care of a newborn? And why did your mom call you? Why do I need to consult with you?
What do you mean, why? You've been leaving Hannah with Marissa, haven't you? It's been almost 2 weeks. Marissa hasn't complained because she doesn't want to ruin her relationship with you, but Mom couldn't stand it and called me.
I was shocked at Bob's words. It was a story I had no memory of. Because my daughter is right in front of me right now. I had a lot of questions, but I felt it was more important to clear up the misunderstanding first, so I responded immediately. Huh? Our daughter is sleeping at home. She's right in front of me now.
Huh?
Bob's voice, which had been filled with surprise until a moment ago, raised in astonishment again.
What do you mean?
I'm as baffled as you are. In fact, I was told it's best not to take newborns out too much, so I haven't really been anywhere besides medical checkups. So, I haven't even been to your family home, and I haven't seen Marissa since she came to visit us after the birth.
Huh? Then whose baby is Marissa looking after?
I wish I knew. Why would Marissa lie about taking care of my baby? One question just seemed to lead to another. As we both scratched our heads, the chime announcing the end of the lunch break rang over the phone. When I heard the chime, I made a decision. I'm going to reach out to Marissa. I want to understand why she might lie. If she's mistaken and thinks she's taking care of her Hannah, that's a real problem.
I'll call Mom too, and,
Bob paused before apologizing.
Sorry for doubting you. I was just so worried about Hannah.
It's okay, you are worried for Hannah, right? Besides, when I told you she's right here, you didn't question it, you believed me. After ending the call, I immediately dialed my sister-in-law's number. Marissa, it's been a while. Do you have a minute? There's something I want to ask. Linda, I have something to say too. Bob and Marissa are close in age. That's why Marissa, despite my sister-in-law, is the same age as me. Marissa and I have always gotten along well since I was dating Bob. We even used to go out together. So, I couldn't help but wonder why she hadn't mentioned anything about the situation to me. I couldn't understand why she would lie like that. Well, this is a good time. I just heard from Bob, Marissa. What do you mean you're looking after Hannah? I've never left Hannah with anyone. Huh? Following Marissa's surprised voice, I could hear a baby crying. Apparently, she is indeed caring for a baby. Listening to Marissa's voice, I had a hunch. Marissa wasn't lying. She truly believed she was caring for Hannah. To clear up Marissa's misunderstanding, I started to explain the situation. Hannah's right here with me, sleeping soundly. I really don't understand what's going on, but how did you end up with a baby, Marissa? And why did you think the baby was Hannah? Marissa responded to my question. Last week, Dad just dropped a baby off with me. He said Linda seems to be having a tough time on her own, so you should help her with her baby. My father-in-law? I couldn't help but raise my voice at this astonishing revelation. Then, Marissa dropped another bombshell. Yeah, I was so scared because I've never cared for a baby. I hadn't heard anything from you, Linda, and when I thought about calling you, Dad said, if you call Linda, she'll just get worked up. Don't you have any consideration for your sister-in-law? I also have a job to do even when I'm home. It seemed that all of this started with my father-in-law's lie, but it wasn't clear who the child my sister-in-law was caring for was. I thought asking my father-in-law would clear things up, so I asked Marissa if he was home. However, it seems he's out right now. Lately, he comes back home in the late evening, picks up the child she's been looking after, saying he's going to return her to Linda, and then leaves again. And apparently, he comes back in about 20 to 30 minutes. Frustrated that my father-in-law was using me and my daughter to lie, I felt like confronting him directly. I get it, I'll need to talk with Bob, but we might come over tonight, I said and hung up the phone. I emailed my husband about what I heard from his sister. I think it's better to ask Dad directly, was the reply, so when Bob got home, we headed over to my in-laws. On the way, Bob shared the conversation he had with his mother. Mom was pretty upset too. To find out that the child she thought was her grandchild wasn't, that's a big shock, ain't it? I didn't think Hannah's first meeting with everyone would be like this. It's complicated. His mother had a bad back, so she hasn't met our daughter yet. I was hoping to introduce Hannah as soon as she was ready to go out after a month. But instead, I'm upset that we're having to introduce her during such a mess. When we arrived at my in-laws, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law were there, both looking bewildered. As we came in, Marissa opened her mouth. Bob, Linda, Dad said he was going to return the child we've been looking after, but he hasn't come back yet. I understand. Mom, despite the circumstances, this is our daughter, Hannah. Bob introduced our daughter, and I moved Hannah closer to my mother-in-law. Seeing Hannah, my mother-in-law's face softened. She's adorable. She looks just like Bob when he was born. I'm so glad to finally meet her. And Linda, you've done so well. I'm sorry you've been caught up in all this. It's okay. I'm just as confused as everyone else. As I said that, Marissa continued. I don't understand it either. Who is this child Dad has been looking after? I don't know why he's lying, and I've been working so hard thinking that child was Hannah. He should consider how I feel too. Like me, Marissa seemed frustrated with our father-in-law. Trying to lighten the mood, Bob interjected. Before that, Marissa, you've met Hannah. You should have noticed it's a different baby. Well, don't all babies look similar? I thought I felt something odd, but I thought maybe their faces change over a few days. Marissa hastily began to defend herself. That's when our father-in-law came back. I'm back. Wait, why are Bob and Linda here? From our father-in-law's panic, it was clear this whole thing was his lie. The rest of us seemed to agree, and we all gave him hard stares. Unable to stand the tension, our father-in-law started to stumble over his words. Ah, Linda, it's been a while. What brings you here? Did you leave something here? Marissa, what are you doing? I told you to check for forgotten items. I was furious at our father-in-law for using me and my daughter's names to lie and then blaming Marissa. I subconsciously gripped my daughter tighter. Both my husband and my sister-in-law seemed to feel the same way, their fists shaking with tension. The first to speak was me. Dad, are you seriously saying that? Don't you think it's a bit too shoddy, even for you? What do you mean? My father-in-law was taken aback by the anger in my voice. That's when my husband and sister-in-law joined in. Dad, explain yourself. Linda has never babysat Hannah. Why would you lie like that? There must be a reason for someone to babysit a stranger's newborn, right? That's right. You tricked me into babysitting. Who is that child? I'm scared even if it's my brother's child, let alone a stranger's. I won't do it again. Do you have any idea how much this has set back my work? With the two of them firing off at high speed, our father-in-law was at a loss for words. While the three of us were glaring at him, wanting to know the truth, my mother-in-law was different. She turned pale, muttering, "No way, you're not still involved with her." At my mother-in-law's words, my husband, sister-in-law, and I were stunned. My father-in-law was breaking out in a cold sweat. What do you mean? Even now, he was trying to play dumb, but my usually gentle husband had had enough. Dad, cut the crap. You've been playing dumb this whole time. You think you can get away with this? We know you've been lying about everything. Just tell the truth. Wait, Bob, calm down. Dad, you've been using Linda and Hannah to cover up your lies, and you owe Marissa an apology. Taking care of a newborn is a big responsibility, even if it's your own child. Imagine how stressful it must have been for Marissa, who's never even raised a child before. Once he started, my husband couldn't stop. Despite everything our father-in-law was saying, my husband didn't let up. Perhaps realizing he couldn't avoid it any longer, my father-in-law sighed softly. And then he confessed to the unbelievable truth. That child is mine. At our father-in-law's words, my husband lost all of his momentum, his mouth hanging open in shock. Marissa and I were also stunned into silence. The one who broke the silence was my mother-in-law. Her voice was trembling and her eyes were wet. I knew it, you're still involved with her. I was a fool to forgive you back then.
Back then?
My husband asked, confused. In response to his question, our father-in-law's face turned even paler. Ignoring him, my mother-in-law started explaining. He had an affair. It was around the time you two were getting married, so about 3 years ago? He promised me he would never do it again, so I forgave him. But now, that's why I thought Hannah looked a bit like Bob. She's his blood after all. I thought she was my real grandchild. Unable to hold back any longer, my mother-in-law started to cry. Seeing her like this, I could feel my anger towards my father-in-law rising. My husband regained his momentum and started to lash out at our father-in-law.
You're the worst, Dad. You didn't just lie to us, you betrayed Mom twice. How could you do such a thing? I can't believe that a person like you is our father.
Bob's shout was followed by Marissa. What do you mean by my child? Are you kidding me? You had a child with your mistress and left it with me? I can't believe it. How can you calmly do such a thing? It's too disgusting. I don't want to see your face ever again.
Despite the harsh words from his own children, father-in-law just chuckled and said, Calm down. There's nothing we can do about what's already happened. The mistress didn't want to marry me or anything like that. She just didn't have any money, so she had to work. In the meantime, I had to take care of the child.
I couldn't bear the sight of my father-in-law laughing and saying these words. Stop it, you worthless man. What you did isn't a laughing matter. A person has been born. Do you understand the gravity of that at your age? When I, who had been silent all along, raised my voice, my father-in-law seemed to lose his footing and fell on his rear end right there, but no one offered to help. Instead, Bob and Marissa started hurling insults.
You shitty old man, you're no longer our father.
I can't stand you physically. I don't want to see your face ever again. Even when confronted by their words, my father-in-law still tried to brush it off, saying,
Don't say things like that.
Seeing this, my mother-in-law sighed dramatically and glared at my father-in-law. I don't have the confidence to keep up with someone like you anymore. Let's get divorced.
Wait, didn't you forgive me last time?
My father-in-law's artificial smile faded and his face sagged with wrinkles. The careless demeanor from earlier disappeared and he suddenly became serious.
Sure, I made a mistake by cheating, but if letting off steam outside makes our home peaceful, isn't that a good thing? Besides, how are you going to survive without me? You've always been a housewife, you probably don't have any money, right?
As my father-in-law clung to my mother-in-law's feet and said this, I watched him with cold eyes. When I glanced over, my husband and sister-in-law were also giving my father-in-law the same look. Everyone in the room was fed up with my father-in-law. My sister-in-law shouted out with anger. I'll take care of Mom, so we'll be fine without you. How are you planning to live? You've always relied on Mom for everything from meals to laundry. Are you sure you'll be okay on your own now? Marissa's words clearly upset my father-in-law. He looked at my mother-in-law with pleading eyes.
You wouldn't abandon me, would you? We've been together for decades. You can't imagine life without me, can you?
However, my father-in-law's hopes were quickly dashed. My mother-in-law shook off his arm that was clinging to her leg. Stop joking. How much do you need to belittle people to be satisfied? Who do you think wants to be with a cheater? I'm going to divorce you right now. If you like her so much, why don't you go be with your mistress?
What? Wait, let's talk. We can work it out. That woman was just a fling. The only one I love is you.
My father-in-law, clinging to my mother-in-law, is once again the target of my sister-in-law's angry voice. Enough! Talking to someone who has no intention of reflecting on their actions is pointless. We're leaving this place soon. Of course, Mom is coming with us. Until we're gone, Dad, you better not come home. I never want to see your face again. Now scram! With that, Marissa tries to forcefully usher my father-in-law outside. Even then, my father-in-law didn't budge, so ultimately, Bob had to physically drag him out.
Please wait. Give me another chance. Just one more.
My father-in-law was shouting this until the end, but no one paid any attention. Afterwards, as Marissa had predicted, my father-in-law's life became a mess, unable to do even basic chores. Unable to endure living in his increasingly cluttered and dirty house, he tried to rely on his mistress, but it seemed she turned him away at the door. The mistress apparently has no intention of marrying my father-in-law either. Since there was no one left to look after the children, the mistress became unable to go to work, and with no income, she started demanding that my father-in-law compensate for the alimony. Currently, they are even going to court to dispute matters such as child support. Meanwhile, my sister-in-law and mother-in-law moved to an apartment not far from our house. As more than a month has passed since the birth, I've started visiting them with Hannah more frequently. I've continued my friendly relationship with Marissa as if nothing has changed, and my relationship with my mother-in-law is also good. From now on, I plan to do my best to raise my daughter with the help of my husband, my sister-in-law, and my mother-in-law.
Fiancé, the one you've promised to marry. Once upon a time, I had a fiancé, but I didn't end up sharing my life with him because of my sister. I was in deep despair back then, but now I found new happiness. And I want to show my sister and my ex-fiancé just that. My name is Catherine. I'm not particularly beautiful, just an average office worker. But back then, I had a man who had promised to marry me. His name was Bob. Bob was a handsome guy, working in a reputable company, the so-called hottie. We were really happy back then. Happiness that I thought would last forever. But the cruel reality dealt me a harsh hand. I couldn't get married to Bob. The cause of it all was my sister. My sister's name is Sophie. Sophie has always been interested in fashion, and she is still as fashion conscious as ever. In fact, Sophie was always much more conscious about her appearance than me, and was always pretty. Therefore, Sophie had been popular with boys since she was in middle school. She even once was an amateur model for a fashion magazine. Because of that, Sophie dreamed of becoming a model. When I graduated from college and was working at a regular company, I was once invited to dinner by a business partner. That partner was Bob. One day, after having connected with Bob a few times and occasionally going out for meals together, something unexpected happened. That day, Bob invited me for dinner after work. Naturally, I had no reason to refuse and went out for the meal. On the way back that evening, Bob confessed his feelings for me. I was surprised at his sudden confession, but I also had feelings for him, so we ended up dating. After a year of dating, Bob proposed to me, and I was overjoyed. Of course I accepted his proposal. A few days later, Bob and I visited my parents' house to report our engagement and to greet them. My parents were, of course, thrilled. We talked about wedding plans and I was very happy, but not everyone was pleased. That person was my younger sister, Sophie. Sophie was surprised to learn that I was getting married and was even more taken aback when she saw who I was marrying. Sophie, who was more attractive and had been asked out by various men, always looked down on me, who had little romantic experience. I don't want my embarrassing sister to be known to my friends. That was what Sophie would always say. The sister who she deemed uncool was getting married before her, and to a successful man from a famous company. This seemed to hurt Sophie's pride even more. But I was completely oblivious to Sophie's feelings. I should have noticed her attitude at this point. One day, Sophie asked, "If you're going to be my brother-in-law, can we exchange contact information?" Bob and I saw no reason to refuse, so we readily agreed. Since I was about to leave my job, there were many days when I had to stay late for the transition process. Then on a day when my parents were out of town, Sophie took a certain action. In hindsight, it was probably a plan she had thought of from the beginning. Once I retired, I planned to move away from my family home and start living with Bob. She probably wanted to execute her plan while I was still at home. Sophie first called Bob to our house. "Bob, my sister suddenly came home sick. Our parents are out of town and I'm feeling uneasy being alone. Could you come over?" Sophie lied, saying that I had cut my work short due to a sudden illness. Bob, who was just about to head home from work, hurried to our house without suspecting a thing. I rushed over because I heard Catherine was ill. "Where is she?" Of course, I wasn't there. It was only natural for Bob to think so. However, Sophie confessed, "I'm sorry, Bob. I lied to you. My sister isn't sick. She's still at work." Upon hearing this, Bob didn't get angry at Sophie, but instead asked, "Why would you lie like that?" "I just really needed to talk to you, Bob," Sophie started to explain. Having wrapped up work, I reached home and was surprised. It was because Bob was there. Yet, without really questioning it, I cheerfully said, "Oh, you're here." Later, I was about to experience the most intense despair and sadness I've ever felt in my life. "Catherine, I'm sorry. I want to break up." It was sudden. I was unable to comprehend the meaning of his words immediately. "What? You're kidding, right?" Break up? What do you mean? Just as I was pressing Bob for answers, Sophie showed up. Catherine, actually, I'm dating Sophie. I'm sorry, Catherine. I've fallen in love with Sophie, more than you. Still confused and in disbelief, Sophie then said to me, I'm sorry, but Bob has decided to marry me. I was totally lost. Then Sophie continued, you might not want to attend our wedding ceremony, but do come to the reception, won't you? All I could do after that was cry. Sophie had taken away my fiancé. I was discarded. Both my dad and mom were extremely worried. For a while, I couldn't leave my room. Since I'd already quit my job, there was nothing I could do. I received several messages from my coworkers asking when the wedding was. I told them it was going to be a simple ceremony with just family. Months later, I found myself in a strange place. Here, I'd start my life anew. I wanted to be happy again, truly happy this time. After breaking up with Bob, I was holed up for a while, but a certain emotion was born within me. Why do I have to suffer like this? Forget that guy, and let's start over. Things progressed rapidly from there. I talked to my dad and mom, deciding to leave home and live on my own. A completely unfamiliar place, but it was a really pleasant place, rich in greenery and peaceful. My parents didn't stop me and even helped me a lot during the move. After the move, while taking a break, I heard this from my mom. A few days after you locked yourself in your room, Bob came. He told me everything that happened between you two, and then he apologized. I didn't understand why my parents were apologizing. Of course, what Bob did is unforgivable. His parents came to apologize too, even kneeling down. But we heard about Sophie as well. I know you can't forgive her, Catherine, but Sophie is also a daughter to us, my parents explained. Both my dad and mom were distressed. She had done something terrible to me. Of course, they couldn't forgive such a person. But Sophie didn't listen to them, and it seems she went to Bob. Since then, Bob had been coming to our house at the same time every day, apologizing and asking for his marriage to Sophie to be approved. Because of Bob's actions, my parents had no choice but to accept. That's why they apologized to me for accepting his marriage to Sophie. Honestly, I didn't care anymore, but I could painfully understand my parents' feelings. It's all in the past now, it's okay. Besides, I'll meet someone better in the future, I replied positively, holding back the tears. My mom was crying. My father looked apologetic, but I said to him, when I have children, I'm going to rely on you a lot. Both my dad and mom responded with smiles. Mom was very concerned, saying, don't hesitate to get in touch if anything comes up. As I started getting used to my new life and had some peace of mind, I began working at a small restaurant. The staff was small in number, but the place was very bright and I really liked the friendly atmosphere everyone had. The manager was a man named Steve, who was often teased by the part-timers. Watching their banter was enjoyable and created a warm atmosphere. A few months after I started working, a fateful event that would impact my future took place. I was confessed to by Steve. It happened when he was giving me a ride home after work. To be honest, I was unsure. Steve was a really good guy. Above all, very kind. He had both the looks and the personality that would be attractive to the opposite sex, but I was still hung up on that incident. I was scared that I might be abandoned again. Steve seemed to notice my hesitation and told me that I didn't have to give an immediate answer, and he went home for the day. Things were a little awkward for a while, but thanks to the usual banter with the part-timers and Steve's kindness, I didn't fret too much. I guess my heart had already made a decision. During one break, I learned something about Steve. Turns out, Steve had been betrayed by someone he was dating and had a terrible experience at the place he worked before this restaurant. Steve and I had the same experience. We both had been betrayed by someone we loved. That day, I decided to go home with Steve so I could hear more about his story. As we were walking home, Steve shared his past. He was actually in charge of a store before he came here. But due to certain incidents, the store lost trust and ended up closing. And Steve was held responsible and lost his job. After hearing his story, I decided to tell Steve why I came to this place. After I finished, Steve said, "You did great." He said that to me, who, despite the pain, stood up and faced forward again. I was overjoyed. And I realized that this was exactly what I wanted to hear. I did my best. I was betrayed by someone I loved and went through a tough time, but I managed to bounce back. honestly, it was very hard. And I told Steve, "You did great too." Steve was smiling. And then I gave my answer to his confession from that day. "I'm a bit of a handful, but I hope you'll be patient with me." After that, the teasing from the part-timers at the restaurant increased. But they were genuinely happy. "Congrats! Wishing you happiness forever." It's too early for that line. So there will be a time eventually. I'll say it again then. You better let me say it, or else. Oh, wait. Steve was a little flustered. I was laughing. Everyone was laughing. It was pure bliss. That was a typical day until a certain point. I was proposed to for the second time in my life. Of course, I accepted the proposal. I was determined to find happiness this time, and I believed that I could be truly happy with Steve. So I headed over to my parents' house for the first time in a while. They were thrilled. I told them everything about Steve, and they said, "Please make our daughter happy." "I promise I'll make Catherine happy," he replied with firmness and confidence. We chatted for a while, then my dad hesitantly said, "Sophie and Bob are going to get married." They said an invitation might come, but I didn't need to stress over it. I wasn't bothered anyway, because I was happy too. In fact, I wanted to flaunt my happiness. When I told my parents that, they said, "If Catherine says so, Steve, we're counting on you if anything happens." A few days later, an invitation to Sophie's wedding arrived. I decided to attend, of course. I responded saying that both of us would be attending. Steve and I had only legally married because Sophie was planning her wedding. We figured it would put too much pressure on our parents and relatives if we had our weddings back to back. We had vowed to have our wedding ceremony once things had settled down. On the day of Sophie's wedding, Steve and I were heading to the venue together. We were reunited with Sophie and Bob, whom we haven't seen in a long time. Bob looked somewhat worn out. During the family introductions, I introduced Steve, saying, "This is my husband, Steve. I'm very proud of him." For some reason, Sophie was visibly surprised when I introduced Steve, which was memorable. On the other hand, I had something I desperately wanted to ask Bob. What had happened between him and Sophie on the day when neither my parents nor I were around? Initially, Bob found it hard to talk, but gradually began to share. Apparently, when Sophie called him on that day and he learned that I was suddenly ill, Bob decided to wait for me. Sophie then came in with strong liquor, saying it would be a waste not to enjoy. Bob, not a heavy drinker, had a couple of drinks and ended up getting drunk. Then according to him, Sophie saw her chance and started to seduce him. Bob was too drunk to make sound judgments, so he gave in to her advances. Sophie was stunning. In addition, she had a great figure, so it's understandable for a regular guy to fall for her advances. Even so, Bob and I were engaged. However, Bob succumbed to the temptation, and from that point on, he started to pay attention to Sophie. Even after sharing this story, Bob kept apologizing to me, but at that moment, he seemed like such a small man to me. Honestly, I couldn't have cared less. I was just relieved to know the truth. Meanwhile, Steve and Sophie were talking about something. I was curious about it, but since Sophie's wedding was imminent, I decided to ask later. On the way home, I asked Steve, "Were you a bit upset when you were talking to Sophie?" "Well, as I told you before, she was my ex who betrayed me, and that's not all. She's the reason why I lost my job." I was utterly surprised. What a small world. Moreover, the fact that she was the cause of the closure of Steve's shop made it even more shocking. I decided to dig deeper. Apparently, a few months after Sophie started dating Steve, she had an affair with a certain designer. It seems Sophie thought it would be more beneficial for her to date someone in the modeling industry, even though she was dating Steve. Upon accidentally discovering this fact, Steve naturally got angry at Sophie. But Sophie in turn got angry at him, and they broke up. However, Sophie's anger didn't subside, and she created a fake photo of foreign objects in the dishes taken at Steve's restaurant and shared it on social media. At the time, Sophie was also doing some model work, so she had quite a few followers, and the photo spread rapidly. It even caught the attention of Steve's boss, who had left the business to him. Due to the decreased revenue, the restaurant ended up closing. As a result, Steve was fired, bearing the responsibility. Naturally, he held a grudge against this incident. However, since he didn't know who was responsible, he didn't know where to direct his anger. In the midst of all this, he learned the truth when a friend invited him for a drink. A friend of Steve's girlfriend happened to know Sophie and had seen her bragging on social media about causing a restaurant to close. Of course, Steve's friend didn't know that the now closed shop was Steve's. Steve, who unexpectedly found the culprit, could no longer do anything, so he decided to start over in a different place. That's when he met me. I apologized to Steve. I'm sorry for the horrible things my sister did. Honestly, I'm the sister of the person who messed up Steve's life. I didn't know what to do. I seriously thought that Steve might hate me. But Steve said, "It's in the past and it's not your fault, Catherine." I was honestly relieved. And once again, we decided to be happy together. Later, Sophie was finally punished. Sophie was going to do a photo shoot, and the place she visited for the shoot, it was our home, of all places. Indeed, it was rich in greenery and likely to take good pictures. Sophie seemed to be considering becoming a model, using this photo shoot as a stepping stone. The incident occurred at a restaurant she visited for dinner. That restaurant was none other than Steve's. I wasn't working at Steve's place anymore, so I heard about it later. As soon as they entered, both Steve and Sophie recognized each other. And immediately, Steve said, "I'm sorry, I can't let you enter," and refused Sophie's group from entering. Of course, the staff got angry and asked what was going on. Steve explained everything, what Sophie had done in the past and the hardships he had endured because of her. "She has a criminal record and I have solid evidence. I don't want to go through the same thing again, so I refuse to let her enter." No one could say anything, and Sophie seemed to have turned pale. Furthermore, Steve said he would tell the president of the company Sophie was about to join about her past. The person who scouted Sophie was shocked and asked Steve to quit. But Steve's anger didn't subside. In the end, Sophie's photo shoot was canceled, and the incident spread in the industry, crushing her dream of becoming a model. Nobody wants to deal with a person who caused such a huge scandal in the past. On top of that, I heard from my mom that Bob's company's performance has been getting worse recently, and now he's a candidate for a demotion. She seemed worried about what would become of these two in the future. Despite such an incident, Steve and I were spending happy days as usual. And today is our long-awaited wedding. Steve and I, we both had some hard times in the past, but now we are very happy. There was also a new life in my belly. Congratulations! Wishing you a lifetime of happiness. The crew from the shop where we first met are laughing and repeating this familiar phrase. Thank you. And so, in front of everyone, Steve and I vowed to always cherish our family and be happy forever.